Hi, I'm Tom Greenwood from sydneyportraits.com.au and greenwoodphotos.com. If you look at the mode dial on any DSLR, you're likely to see these symbols. There's green or auto, P, TV, AV, M and B. So what do they mean and how can you use them to progress as a photographer? In a nutshell, the modes determine who controls the exposure settings, you or the camera. By exposure settings, I mean the holy trinity of photography. That's ISO, shutter speed and aperture. Allowing the camera to control these settings makes life easy, but it doesn't necessarily make for great photos. As you develop as a photographer, you should be aiming to make all the decisions about ISO, shutter speed and aperture yourself. Sneak preview, ultimately you want to be using M or manual mode. It's worth noting that modes vary a bit between different cameras, particularly for the more automatic or beginner modes. Experiment to find out what each mode will allow you to do and what it will tell the camera to do itself. Green or automatic mode. This is the most basic mode. It will make all the decisions for you. ISO, shutter speed, aperture, and when to use flash. That's fine if you've never picked up an SLR before. P or program mode. This is similar to the green mode in that it decides on shutter speed and aperture, but it does give you control over ISO and use of flash. Now, since you're watching this video, you probably want to reach beyond these two modes and start applying some real control over how the camera works. So let's look at TV or shutter priority mode. This is useful for situations in which shutter speed will be the dominant consideration. Shutter speed is always important, but when your subject is moving, it becomes crucial. The speed of your shutter determines whether your subject is sharp or blurred. Here are some quick examples. To freeze these racing sheepdogs required a shutter speed of 1/400th of a second. And to capture the movement of these sheep, I slowed the shutter to just 1/10th of a second. So in shutter priority mode, as with other modes we're about to discuss, you have control over ISO and flash, but the camera will adjust the aperture as you change the shutter speed in order to achieve a correct exposure. In other words, not too bright or not too dark. Shutter priority is useful for learning about and experimenting with shutter speed, but it does have its limitations, especially if you want full control of aperture. AV or aperture priority mode. Aperture affects the amount of light you allow into the camera. So an open or wide aperture will help you shoot in low light, such as at dusk or indoors. Aperture also has more artistic applications, such as depth of field, which, put simply, is how sharp or blurry you'd like the background to be. In aperture priority mode, the camera will adjust the shutter speed as you change the aperture in order to achieve a correct exposure. AV is great for experimenting with aperture. The danger is that in some cases the camera will select shutter speeds that are too slow for a crisp image. M or manual mode. This is what most professional photographers use 95% of the time. Why? Because it gives you complete control over the holy trinity, that's ISO, shutter speed and aperture. As you become more experienced, you'll realize that every image is a balance, sometimes a compromise between these elements. So the ability to adjust each one of them is crucial. Because manual mode is so important, I'm doing a separate video on how to apply it when shooting. Finally, let's look at B or bulb mode. This is for really long exposures, notably for night photography. Most cameras have shutter speed settings that allow the shutter to be open for up to 30 seconds when in the other modes. But some night shots might require shutter speeds of minutes or even hours. Bulb mode allows the shutter to be opened and then closed at the push of the shutter button or a remote switch. So that's it for DSLR modes. I hope you found it useful. Thanks for watching and see you next time.